はい、皆さん、こんにちは。米国特許セミナー ExaminIrks を始めたいと思います。いつも各週火曜日のランチタイムにお届けしています。講師は特許弁護士であるブライアン・エプスタインさんです。今回は第7回目になります。今回は前回に続いて、パテントプロセキューションハイウェイ、PPH を扱います。前回は PPH におけるクレーム補正、特に独立クレームの補正には制限があることについて解説いただきました。今回は PPH 活用のコツについてさらに詳しくご解説いただきます。それではブライアンさんにお話しいただきたいと思います。So, Brian さん、during session 6, we discussed the patent prosecution highway, PPH. Do you have any more tips for keeping examiners happy in PPH cases?
Yeah, absolutely. PPH is a common avenue for mostly for foreign non-US applicants to obtain patent prosecution in the United States. And it can create a lot of inefficiencies. The primary source for that is in the requirement for sufficient correspondence. Examiners sometimes complain that applicants do not always follow the rules for amending claims under the PPH program. So what are those rules? The claims have to sufficiently correspond to in the Office of later examination. So in this case, we're discussing the USPTO. They must correspond to the allowed claims in the Office of earlier examination. So in a lot of cases, for Japanese applicants in particular, we're discussing the JPO. And so what sufficient correspondence is that it requires a claim to have a similar or narrower scope as an allowable claim in the application in the Office of earlier examination. Right, this is the office that sent the notice of allowance, the decision to grant, whatever it is, in the non-US jurisdiction. However, there's this additional requirement that narrower claims must first be written in dependent form. So when we present the claims in a new application, maybe they can be narrower there, but we can't just amend the claims during prosecution. Most narrowing amendments should first find basis in a dependent claim. All right, why did I say most? One thing that can occur is your examiner can allow you to amend the independent claims directly. An example of that would be, the examiner finds your claim to be indefinite. There's no way to really amend that by adding features from a dependent claim and incorporating them into the independent claim. So in that case, you can amend the claim directly. If your examiner tells you that you can amend the claim directly, then you can do so. That frequently comes up during interviews, which is a reason why I really recommend conducting interviews in PPH applications. And so we already covered that, generally the applicant cannot directly amend the independent claim. And so if you receive an art rejection, for example, anticipation, obviousness, the typical way, you're unlikely to have had a dependent claim that you can immediately roll up to address the examiner's position. It can happen, of course. Sometimes dependent claims are indicated as allowable. And so in that situation, of course, we can just roll up the existing dependent claim. However, these claims were indicated as allowable in some non-US jurisdiction. US patent prosecution is kind of weird because we have this broadest reasonable interpretation standard. And so it's very hard to predict the kinds of interpretations that an examiner might give a claim. So what happens? So we receive an art rejection, we add a new dependent claim with a narrower feature to overcome the art, and that's it. Then we present arguments that the independent claim actually overcomes the combination if it's an obviousness rejection. We don't expect those arguments to work, but we have to do it. And then we also separately argue the dependent claim. We say something like, to further clarify the distinctions of the independent claim, or of the subject matter over the applied references. Applicants submit new claim, whatever, 8. And then we separately argue the dependent claim. And then we are, in a sense, arguing for the patentability of our future independent claim. And then when we get our next office action, assuming, because we're very likely to get one, right? We did not amend our independent claim. We don't believe that our arguments to the existing independent claim are very strong. We can assess the strength of the rejection of this new dependent claim. Again, in our example, that's new dependent claim 8. And so I guess what ends up happening is, we have to, it takes twice as long to overcome a reference or an art rejection. In response to the first one, we cannot amend the claim as we typically do. We add a dependent claim. In response to the second office action, now we can incorporate the dependent claim into the independent claim. And again, because of US practice, we're typically under final at that point.
はい。ここまで、PPH において、独立クレームを補正したい場合、まず従属クレームとして特徴を追加して、次にその特徴を独立クレームに追加するという、こういう手順を経る必要があるということでした。で、この手順では RCE が必要になってくるように思われます。このことについて次にブライアンさんに聞いてみたいと思います。So Brian-san, to restate your point differently, an applicant typically cannot pay for one OA response, the amend independent claim. The applicant must pay for 2 OA responses. Under US practice, that will typically require an RCE fee. That sounds expensive. Can the applicant freely amend independent claim after the RCE?
So no, this is a big difference between US practice and, again, for example, Japanese practice. In Japan, there are no RCEs. Either the case gets allowed or maybe the case goes up on appeal and gets allowed there, or a divisional application is filed, and the special status of the PPH program does not attach or carry over to the Japanese divisional application because it's a different application. And that's true in the US with regards to continuations. So first, examiners complain that applicants expect the special status of the PPH program will not carry over if an RCE is filed. Especially if you've been doing this for a while, once upon a time, RCEs were kind of considered new applications. But now, that's been clarified that they're not, and special status does carry over with the RCE. What that means is when you file the RCE, you are still in the PPH program. You cannot escape the PPH program by filing an RCE. So, we've in our hypothetical prosecution, we had the not final, we added a dependent, we got a final, we incorporated our dependent, we filed our RCE, and now we have another non-final office action. And all we've done is amend our independent claim once. So if you're the type of applicant that can get, or if you represent the type of applicant that can get a US patent issued on one amendment to the independent claim, no problem. But if you're not, now you're already an RCE in, and you have to begin the process again. You'll get a rejection, right? Because we said it's going to take, in our hypothetical, we're saying that this applicant usually takes 2 OAs. We have to add a new dependent. We get a second final. We roll it up, and again, we're looking at another RCE. The costs just spiral out of control. Again, I really recommend interviews because we're doing everything we can to prevent the costs from building. And so, well, let me go ahead and finish this slide and a thought before I get to the next point. Special status under the PPH program in the United States does not carry over to a continuing application. So, for example, a continuation, or if you received a restriction, it would not carry over onto a divisional application. All right, so how do we get out of the PPH program? So this first one is, we discussed this before in session 6 of ExaminIrks. I was kind of building towards it just now, and that's filing a continuation application and then abandoning this PPH parent application. Why is that effective? Again, we discussed it in session 6, but in case people missed it, the short version is, the point of the PPH program, part of the point of the PPH program is to accelerate the examination of the case. Separately, and this might be changing due to the new docketing system, but examiners will typically examine continuation applications more quickly than original filings. So there shouldn't be a significant delay on the examination of this child continuation application. Okay. You're still getting the benefit of participating in the PPH program in that respect. However, now you can freely amend the claims. You don't have to go through, 2 office actions to respond. You don't have to submit the claim correspondence chart. All right. What's the other alternative? So this one's pretty cool. You can file a track 1 application instead of PPH. In my experience, applicants dislike the fee of the track 1 cases. I dislike the fee. It's $4,000 for a non-discounted entity, for a large entity. It seems kind of crazy, just to get, earlier examination of your application. However, I went ahead and kind of, sketched out some likely scenarios just to get an approximation of like what would the break even be. At what point would a PPH case be better filed as a track 1 case, right? If the point is to accelerate examination, track 1 does it as well. Track 1 has a short, there's evidence to support the view that track 1 has a condensed prosecution, it has a higher allowance rate. Certainly, sometimes art is not yet accessible to the examiner, and so there's a small advantage there. All right, so what's the break even? So this over-under point is 2.5 office actions. I don't know who's out there listening to this. I don't know who your applicants are. I don't know what your standard length of prosecution is. But just to give some idea, if it takes a typical case more than 2.5 office actions, so like 3 office actions, or more, you're probably better off filing under the track 1. If you're the type of applicant that can get cases allowed on 1 office action response, maybe 2, you're better off with PPH. And to be honest, when I kind of came up with this over-under line, I was trying to favor the PPH program. So the over-under is actually probably below 2.5. It's probably like 2.25. Like, so if you file, I guess that'd be 4 applications, 3 of them get allowed in 2 office actions, and the 4th one takes a third. If you're not that kind of applicant, if it takes you, 3 office actions on average, if you're filing that second RCE in a lot of cases, don't do PPH. It's going to be a big waste of money. It's going to be more expensive than track 1. Track 1 looks worse because you pay the fee up front, but you pay it, you're done, you get to move forward. PPH is a slow grind. You're constantly adding claims. You can run into claim fee issues. You're conducting as many interviews as you can because if your examiner lets you get slides another feature in or find some words that prevent an extra office action, that's a really good way to save money. That's a really good way to save money. And so, PPH is it's expensive. It's supposed to be cheap and fast, and it doesn't end up that way because of the claim correspondence requirement and the US rule about the special status tracking across the RCE. So yeah, like I said, in practice, the over-under might be even lower than 2.5.
Okay. So PPH is best for applicants who already get cases allowed efficiently. If applicants have problems getting cases efficiently allowed, then a better option is track 1 or no special program.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
はい、ブライアンさん、ありがとうございました。解説にあったように、場合によっては、継続出願やトラック1という優先審査制度も選択肢として考えられるということでした。はい、今回はこれで以上になります。ご質問や扱ってほしいトピックなどがありましたら、YouTube のコメント欄に書いていただくか、スライド最後に記載のメールアドレスまでお気軽にご連絡ください。では本日もありがとうございました。失礼します。
Thank you.